Hi everybody, joining me today is the wonderful Anna Brees from Brees Media. Hi Anna, how are you?
Hello, very good, thank you.
Anna, for the benefit of my audience, for those who don't know you, I know many of them will, but could you explain what it is that you do, why you do it, and what your background is that has led to you this new part of your career, I suppose?
Well, I used to call myself a journalist, a professional journalist. I started off in newspapers, the Guernsey Press, and then I went into television, ITV, for many years as a reporter and then presenter. And I went to ITV in Oxford, I went to ITV in Birmingham, then I went down to BBC South Today, BBC in Southampton. Then I ended up doing some work at BBC X-Ray in Cardiff. So I was a producer, reporter, presenter, professional TV journalist. Then I took some time out to look after kids. I worked for the National Union of Journalists, doing some training courses as a coordinator, just an admin job. And then I had an opportunity to kind of go back into work. So I could have gone back to the BBC or ITV, and I had all those skills. In fact, when I worked at the BBC in Cardiff, I was one of the only producers that could edit, because I literally can do everything. I can film, edit, and scripts, and do the pieces to camera and the voiceover and everything. So I had the opportunity to go back, but it just didn't feel right. For a number of reasons. There were two different reasons that it didn't feel right for me to go back into that professional journalism world. One of them was the fact that 4 or 5 channel era that I grew up with, we were producing this half-hour regional programme or national programme, and I was, I could have been a presenter doing presenter links with all my nice hair and my jacket and my makeup into these packages, these 2-minute packages. Now, there was a time when that kind of news content had to exist, but it feels very much out of context now. When we were in that 4 or 5 channel era, that's how we were consuming news, and we're not anymore. We didn't have the ability to all film and edit and broadcast to communicate with everyone. So it just felt like anachronistic, out of context, and fashionable, and kind of, if we now have the power to all film and edit and publish ourselves, and I always felt on television there was a voice I was missing, because I'd literally be in the story for a day and maybe just be filming someone in their homes, in their lives for an hour. I couldn't get a full feeling and flavour of the story. I couldn't speak to everyone involved in the story. So I thought, when I started to learn mobile journalism, how to film and edit with a mobile, I could show everyone the skills so they could film and edit and share their story. I don't have to come in then in this kind of, I think you feel very important as a TV reporter, and my mum, the old lady, used to make a fuss of my mum in the town because I was on TV. And you swan into people's lives and you communicate to the world about what's really going on, and then you swan off again. And it isn't real. And it's often press release based. So the news that you're getting, the news agenda, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I could never work out why that was a lead story and that was the finally. None of it really made a lot of sense. And the great thing, wonderful thing now is we don't have to consume news in that way. So that was one of the reasons I decided to go out on my own as a mobile journalism trainer. The other reason was obviously the massive controversies within the BBC, and how they handled issues like Jimmy Savile. They even investigated themselves, and BBC journalists like Miriam Jones said that everyone on the right side of the Jimmy Savile story, i.e. the ones that wanted to expose it, they were seen as traitors. That's what he said. And the people that kept quiet, they're the ones that obviously do well, they're the ones that get put in management positions, and they become the BBC executive. So did I want to work for an organisation like that? No. So those were the two different reasons why I decided to go it alone.
Okay, I'll come to the Jimmy Savile bit in a bit, because that's obviously something that is, it needs to be touched on. It's a huge, it's not going to go away, that story is, and I think the Jimmy Savile story is just one of many. I think it's just the one that came to the top. I think there's plenty that we haven't heard of. And people like you hopefully are going to expose that going forward. Now, just going back to the journalism side of things, when you worked at the ITV and BBC, the bugbear that I have at the moment for their so-called reporting is it's all based on sources say. It's never you me sitting down, or a reporter sitting down with somebody, getting in their own words what has gone on, and then going to the other side and say, well, they're saying this has happened, what do you say? It's all sources say, or somebody is sources from the inside of this with knowledge of it, or my best friend's next door neighbour's dog has a guy on the inside who knows something. That's the way, seemingly, all of our media is constructed like that now. There's not any personal journalism like you're doing. Am I correct in assuming that is what it's like actually when you're working there as well?
I get contacted all the time with the most horrific stories from whistleblowers and victims and survivors of abuse. Now, a lot of them don't want to go on the record, okay, so you don't name the source. Mm-hmm. So in some situations you have to have an unnamed source. If it's a massive, huge public interest, sometimes you have to publish a story. But what I would say is that those stories can't really stack up unless you have a number of unnamed sources. But it's become lazy. It's become quick and lazy and low risk. So they will often cover stories if they feel it's been covered somewhere else, or if it's come from a press release.
It seems pre-packaged. It's almost like it's not news anymore. It's just public relations.
Because since sort of the last 2 years, I've been doing training with corporate communications companies, so I have seen the other side of things. So how does the information come to the newsroom from these companies? So they create press releases. They have relationships of trust. They're corporate communications teams. There's a lot of money paid to these individuals, quite a large number of staff to manage the media relations, so the information flow, so they could create a story. So for example, I was listening to Radio 2 just this afternoon, and it was about Banksy, but there'll be somebody with a lot of money creating that news agenda, putting it in the mind of the newsroom, because they have to create content really quickly. They need to have information that they know is going to be reliable, so that it comes from these news agencies or PR companies that they know there won't be any huge legal risks, so they won't get done for defamation or anything else. And also because it's already kind of there packaged for them. So a lot of the time with journalism, it's a lot of complacency. So they may get calls from the public with whistleblowers or victims or people with incredible abuse, so a series of incredible evidence rather of these stories that the public should be hearing about, of corruption. There's one in particular I'm thinking about that I'm aware of that involves an MP, but they just don't have the time to investigate. They don't spend the time investigating it because they're producing content so quickly. Some people do have investigative teams. The Sunday Times has got one, BBC has got one, but generally what can happen is they can spend months and months on an investigation and then maybe drop it if it doesn't stack up. So they don't spend a lot of time. It's called journalism as well. It's where you're just churning it out, all the stories, and you'll find all the news organisations are churning out the same stories every day because it's all coming from the same source. It's coming from the news wires and these PR and comms departments with a lot of money.
Yeah, it just gets filtered down. It goes to 3 or 4 places and then just gets filtered down. And it's all the news is just the same with different points of view. You were mentioning there about. You're mentioning it about how it gets dropped. Now, something comes to my mind, a big story from a year or two ago. There was an investigation by Al Jazeera into the Labour Party, into Labour Friends of Israel in the Labour Party. And it was an expose that really did not look good for members of the Labour Party who were caught on tape. And because of the political pressure involved, that was suppressed, and it only came out a year later or something like that because of something Qatar were upset with Saudi Arabia over something, or Israel over something, I assume. But that type of journalism is really important, and it gets suppressed on a daily basis. Now that did come out; it's still not talked about in our media over here. But I just wanted to really, give an example of what you're talking about there, of it just getting stopped, especially if it rattles the wrong person's page, if they're powerful.
Well, it tends to be the news that we get from the newspapers or the established corporate media, whatever you want to call it. People call it dinosaur media, the corporate media. the legacy media.
Old media.
The old media is the one I use. The word
I've been using it. I've been using it for the last 3 weeks. I think it's brilliant.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Old media.
That's wonderful. Well, it is. We've got to be quite positive as well, because there's a generational thing. So my parents, obviously, they have a very different relationship of trust with the old media, but the younger generations don't. They have a much more kind of they haven't got that sort of broadcasting brand reputation that we had. Yeah. So you grow up with certain brands, you trust them and you rely on them. Yeah, they become a really big part of your life. And we were born in the 70s. Yeah, I was born in 76. You were born in 74. So we grew up listening to the news for hours every day, and you cannot underestimate the programming elements of that. It was where we went to. It was our go-to place to find out what was happening locally, nationally, globally. But that is not the situation now for those younger than us, especially under 30, and people are older than us. Yes, they're the ones with a lot of money probably still controlling that's narrative within the legacy or old media. But, the money will flow to truth. It will flow to where people will more convinced. Generally as a society, we want good things to happen. We want to protect the vulnerable. We want to progress. And I think that if the flow of money and advertising money is going to a biased, legacy, old dinosaur media, but when that generation die, which will happen, I think the money will then flow to a new, fresh, new media, which is run by independent journalists, citizen journalists, and they can't keep. This is what's happening, which I've really noticed a big shift in the last 2 years. There has been a massive shift, in particular against the BBC. I definitely see it and feel it, especially after the election. And any time I tweet about the BBC, obviously because I used to work for them, there's an unbelievable amount of anger. It's like
venomous almost, isn't it? The way
especially because our generation, especially because we had them in our lives and they were such a big part of our lives, and then we had Jimmy Savile, and then we had Rolf Harris.
It's like finding out the love of your life has been cheating on you for 20 years. I wanted
Isn't it? And it is such an important point, and so many people feel it. But all I would say is the BBC is starting to feel it. And there is massive pressure. And big BBC personalities like Hugh Edwards and David Dimbleby are addressing it, and they are feeling it, and they're not liking it, and something's got to be done.
It nicely brings me on to what I wanted to talk about next, because I wanted to ask for the future of journalism. Now, obviously, you're teaching people to anybody can do the news with their mobile, and you're teaching them to edit it and everything. It's fantastic what you're doing. Now, when I say what for the future of journalism, what next for the journalists who are around at the moment who consider themselves celebrities? What somebody said to me the other day, the journalists think they're celebrities. Not just what next for them, but my feeling is, and I don't know, I wanted to really run this by you, but because obviously you've been closer to the mechanisms of power, I suppose, than me, especially in the media. My feeling is that most journalists out there, not just journalists, but MPs as well, anybody in positions of power who serve the public, most of them are either dumb to the problems that we face and they don't understand them, or the minority that do, either they fall into one of two groups. Either they have no power whatsoever, or they're the sort of person you don't want anywhere near the levels of power. That's the impression I get anyway. Is that sort of
let's look at journalists, the people with real power that are influencing us in our society as we lead forward are mainly, for me, media and politicians. Okay, they're both incredibly important. I'd say the media is even more important than politicians. Let's look at who is drawn to that profession, because I work with all of these people in the media especially, and they weren't drawn to it to hold power to account. They weren't drawn to it to be investigative journalists, but that's to make the world a better place. I've heard a little bit about you, and we've talked. You're an exceptional person.
Isn't that why you did it?
That's why I did it. They did it for ego. Okay, they all had some kind of they had some kind of ego damage without a shadow of a doubt, because I was never able to forge close relationships with any of them in journalism. Anyone on camera, Everyone behind camera, really fantastic.
Yeah.
They still go to reunions. They were like family. Wonderful friendships with people who dealt with on the techie side of things behind the camera. And I could notice this pattern every single newsroom I went to. And you've got to think I worked at ITV in the Channel Islands, ITV in Oxford, ITV in Birmingham, BBC Saturday, BBC in Cardiff. Every single time I worked with presenters or television journalists, it was the same. They had ego issues. They weren't drawn to it to hold power to account. They didn't generally investigate stories. They rejigged press releases, a written press release into a TV, basically. And they'd do interviews without realising it. They had agendas. And I think the same thing with politics. They're mainly career politicians. They start off at a very young level. That I don't think go into it because they really, not all of them, but genuinely have a passion for social justice to make the world a better place. And I'm the way I am because of my father. And he taught me that it was my duty to be a compassionate individual and to do everything I can for people who are vulnerable, and especially children. You know, if children are vulnerable children in care who have no one looking out for them, if they're being abused, which is what appears to have been happening for decades and not getting any better, then something has to be done. You know, I'm only on this planet for a short amount of time, but we cannot allow these things to be happening to vulnerable members of our society and children. And if our own establishment and government and media have been covering up this horrific child sexual abuse, something massive needs to be done to sort it out.
Okay. I want to talk about that now because you say that your courses are partly funded by a book, aren't they? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a year ago I met somebody called Michael Tarragon, and he's 70 years old now, and he's got COPD, which is a terminal illness. And he had been given £10,000 compensation money from Lambeth Council because when he was 4 years old, he was placed in a foster home. And also he was in Shirley Oaks, which is another children's home. Basically, he was sexually abused horrifically as a child. And he was sold out by his foster parents to other men. And he tells this story in his book. So first of all, he wrote this book and he spent £4,000 of his £10,000 compensation money. He'd approached journalists who didn't want to know, the Sun in particular. I thought, how awful is this? And you just listen to him and speak to him and you know every word of it is the truth, what happened to him. He doesn't want any money from it. He just cannot believe this happened to a child in the care of Lambeth Council. So I met him, we rewrote his story, and I thought, I've got to be a journalist here. What are you doing, journalists? You know, what are you doing? Professional journalists out there, not getting these stories out there, not believing these individuals. So we got the book published. We've made £4,000 last year, and every single penny has been spent on training people and showing them how to do what we did for Michael. So how can they write a book independently on Amazon, get it on Amazon, get their story out there? But also how can they use a mobile phone to communicate their story and get, you know, looking at organic and paid share as well across different platforms. So, you know, we're looking at the importance of photographs and images when you're creating videos and how to construct those stories to get people to hear them. So we've used the money for those workshops last year and we intend to run more this year. So out of something pretty horrible and dark and evil has come something very, very good, and it's the human spirit, and it's that fighting human spirit that we've still got going inside us. So yeah, Michael's still with us. Michael Tarragon, and the book's called Meat Rat Boy. So
I will get it. I will get it and I'll read it.
If you're not, it's a very, very difficult book to read though. I mean, he was you know, sexually, he was angrily raped, and it's gruesome. And he also talks about experience with Edward Heath, the former Prime Minister. Some people can't read it, especially if anyone's got any history of abuse in their lives. The other book, as well, if I make any money from, I use it to do training, is called Making the News 2018, and I touch a lot more on these issues around how we get the news, how journalists communicate to us, where the news comes from, and really the power of new media and how things are changing in the world of the media, and that's called Making the News 2018.
Okay.
And I never push my book because I don't like pushing my own book, but people have said it's a very interesting read. And again, any passive income I make means I can do more citizen journalism training. Okay,
Making the News 2018. There you go. She might not want to plug it, but I will. Go buy it. Making the News 2018. You mentioned there Ted Heath. Now, there's Ted Heath. We already mentioned off camera the Jimmy Savile. situation with his awful history. I want to lead on to that. Where would you, we've probably already touched on this, where would you say public trust in the media and the United Kingdom's institutions are right now? I'm not talking just BBC, I'm talking members of Parliament, I'm talking, House of Lords, because all of these things, if you actually look at what happened with Jimmy Savile and what happened with Ted Heath and all, people must have known.
The thing is, even if it's not been confirmed by the so-called legacy of corporate media, people are thinking it, okay? It's sown that seed of doubt, and you're right. What really concerns me is this cynicism, this growing, and this lack of trust and belief in a lot of things, because you start to lose faith in the goodness of people, don't you?
Yeah. How many times has somebody said to you, or have you heard somebody say, I knew something was up with Jimmy Savile? Everybody in my family said to me at some stage, he's not right, he isn't. Look at the way he's acting. So if people watching the TV could see it, surely people behind the scenes, I mean,
they knew it.
He had his own office in Leeds, and they were I heard that they were telling young children when he went round, or pretend you're asleep so he doesn't, come in, and it's horrific. And I know there were rumours that Jill Dando, for instance, was going to do an expose, wasn't there?
We don't know the truth of Jill Dando. It's just very, very sad. We don't know. But if she was, will that ever get out? Will the truth ever be known?
Yeah, and this is what I want to get onto, really, because obviously we've got the whole situation now with this Jeffrey Epstein guy who's had, I counted, don't quote me on this, but the guy had 17 different ways to contact Peter Mandelson in his little black book, with all sorts of MPs from the UK and obviously US. And this is somebody who, let's face it, has been trading young girls for what? I don't know. I don't want to go into. If we don't fix this now, and if it continues, and if we continue to have our institutions sweep it under the rug as they have done, we don't root out this rot that runs through these establishments, what hope do you think there is for Great Britain, and how united can the United Kingdom be going forward if we're not looking after the people who are being abused terribly by those who are revered?
Well, we've got to name and shame them, and it's not just the abusers, it's the people who keep quiet. So
the enablers.
The enablers, because they don't do anything. So we're not celebrating whistleblowers. People are. But what we've got to realise, that this is so powerful, and I want it to be a positive message, because it can feel very cynical and negative. I know people that have been bullied or have witnessed horrendous injustice and abuse in the workplace, for example. Now, 10 years ago, could just these people in power could get away with it, right? Oh, they've just got a small Facebook following, their family and friends. If those people learn video and understand social media, they then suddenly have a voice, and they can become an embarrassment and cause problems. And we have to support those individuals and trust them. They could be whistleblowers or victims of abuse, but they have seen something in their workplace. They've either been affected or other people have, and they have leaked it out and got it out, either to reputable journalists or they've leaked it out themselves. So we cannot be silenced anymore, because of the first time in the history of our species, we can all communicate with each other.
Yeah.
And you cannot hide these secrets. Although you've had some problems, like you say, with Facebook, and it's been such an inspiration meeting you. And for anyone watching, this is your channel. I hope you don't mind me saying, but the work that you've been doing without being paid, you've come here today to meet me. It doesn't sound like you're not making any money at all. You were doing this. Your drive is for making the world a better place. And I just don't meet people like you, and it's so inspiring. If we had more people like you, I think the world would be a lot better place, because you care and you're doing something about it. And I would appeal to anyone listening, if you care, do something about it. We've all got time to comment and share, to get these stories out there. We're all a little bit too quiet and embarrassed, and we're not doing what we need to do. We all have a responsibility here.
Thanks so much, Anna. That means a lot to me. It really does.
The kit that you've got, obviously your audience have been helping to pay for your kit, but I would like to see you get more funding, because every single Assange demo you've been going to, you've been travelling all over the country, you've come all the way from Wolverhampton to see me in Cardiff just for a short interview, and you need some support, financial support, to pay for your expenses.
My audience are great. My audience are great. I actually didn't have enough money in my bank to pay my return ticket last night, and I went live and I told everybody, and they sent me enough to get it to send me down here. My audience have funded this interview, and the reason they do it is not because they think I'm wonderful, although obviously some do, and because I am.
You are. He is wonderful. He is wonderful.
They do it because they want the truth. That's what it comes down to.
You
they
don't
just
meet
want the
people
truth.
like you every day. You just don't. Where I live, people like you do not exist. You are the guiding light, the fire that needs to spread. That positivity, that kindness and compassion and selflessness is the opposite of psychopathy. It's empathy. Okay? There's selfish people who are psychopaths, who are very materialistic and just care about themselves. And there's people like you who are, you're not earning any money. You're just giving everything you've got for selfless reasons. Yeah, everything. We need more of that. That's the light that needs to spread. And at the moment, very big patches of society and the country feel dark. We need to find more people like you. Get this out there. We are now all in a position to do something. Learn and understand Twitter. Learn and understand Facebook if you don't, and YouTube. Even if you don't have any money, by commenting and sharing, you're going to really help the growth. Excuse me, let me turn that off. You're really going to help those posts and those people with that message of truth and justice to get out there.
You mentioned, the dark there. If there had been dark times, there is a huge disconnect, isn't there, between the public opinion of our institutions and MPs compared to what the institutions and the MPs think about themselves and their institutions. I'm thinking, people at the BBC obviously think that the BBC is wonderful. We hear them talking all the time. The BBC is wonderful, and whereas people on the street, if you ask them, it's like night and day, isn't it? And what I wanted to ask you is, can you explain, first of all, can you explain why you're hopeful? I think you obviously already have. We touched on that by...
I wouldn't be talking to you if I wasn't hopeful. There would be no point.
I am hopeful as well.
We've got to be.
If I wasn't hopeful, I wouldn't do this. I would just do something else, because what's the point if it was hopeless? But how do you think that journalism should be funded?
This is a really important point. This is the biggest problem. And what is journalism? Because journalism, let's be honest, had to exist in an era where somebody had to disseminate information of what was going on. Who's died in the village, who's been born, when's the schools closed, or I don't know, anything that was happening. We had to have newspapers, and then we had TV. So journalism, in a sense, is a massive crisis, because we don't really need it in the same way that we did. It's just there to interpret the situation of what's going around. But I do have hope, because there are people like you out there, and I do think that we are the future, people like you and me, and we have to be supported. So I know people, there aren't many of us, who've left the mainstream media, corporate old media, dinosaur media newsroom, and they've gone and said, I'm not happy. Tarek had it. Tarek, you spoke to. But they've suddenly got no income. So we have to support these individuals. So they have to get funding from the public to enable their work to continue. So the subscription-based service really works, or people getting donations. But you've got to be very careful then, and I'm sure this is an issue you might have, is that you will have supporters and you'll have an audience, and they'll only want certain types of stories. And you've got to serve that. And what you may actually come across information that they don't like, and you might publish it. So if you're serving an audience, you've got to challenge them as well. And hopefully they're as open-minded as you, and they're open to this information that may come forward. So if you found out some horrific stuff about Julian Assange you didn't know about, that could lead you into a cognitive dissonance situation. Again, so we constantly have to challenge ourselves. We must always remain open-minded to all evidence that comes to us, even if it doesn't sound like something that we like.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I totally agree with you.
But we're all tempted to serve our audiences.
Yeah, we are. I had a situation like I was highly critical of Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party last year, and a lot of my listeners are left-leaning Labour Party supporters, socialists. And I had a situation where somebody, because I was extremely critical, I thought, I like Jeremy Corbyn. I voted for him twice, you know. But I was highly critical of him, and I told and somebody, people withdraw their patronage to me and started asking other people, telling other people to withdraw their support for me as well.
I hate it.
It's like, guys, the reason I was having a go at Jeremy Corbyn was somebody you just mentioned there, Julian Assange, which I wanted to talk to you about next, because I felt like he hadn't stuck up for him enough.
It's very difficult as a journalist to not get involved and to not be non-political, because as soon as you do, you can lose loads and loads of people. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of different issues like that, and I've picked up on that. I was invited to a Q event. Have you heard of QAnon?
QAnon, yeah.
And I looked
Trust
into
the plan.
it. Oh God,
Trust the plan.
And then everyone thought I was in the club because I just mentioned Q. All I did is, can you tell me a little bit more? Q. Oh, she's in the club. She's in the Q club. Yay! And I'm like, I'm not in the Q club. I've looked into Q, and it's not for me. No, I don't like the Q club. Oh, we hate her. Get rid of her. Can't we just all be kind of open-minded and have a discussion about these things? But anyway, moving on to Julian Assange.
Yeah, you reminded me something to come back to talk about. I wanted to talk to you about Julian Assange because today we found out that the Brazilian government are going after, Bolsonaro is going after Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept, because he's been doing a lot of exposés on corruption in the Brazilian government. And Christian Ranson, I think his name is, the editor of WikiLeaks. I heard an interview with him this morning, and he was saying basically this is a carbon copy of what they're going after Julian Assange for. We're going to see more of this, aren't we, with the persecution of journalists?
Instead of celebrating good, fantastic investigative journalists and whistleblowers, them being imprisoned or even killed, which has happened. From belief, all we can do, I guess, is get the right people in power to make sure that this tables are turned. I just hope that the old way of politics and the old way of media is going to die out. The generations above us, because if you watch things like TikTok, have you ever looked at TikTok or YouTube? Young people, they're just fresh and open-minded and excited, and I just don't think they're going to put people like Boris Johnson in power, and I don't think they're going to put other political leaders in power who are propping up this old legacy, which is corrupt and dark, and it doesn't support and it doesn't invest time in investigative journalism. It doesn't celebrate whistleblowers, and it is, I should probably be proud of, my generation and the past, and I'm not. I'm looking forward to something very different, very fresh, something that's something that hopefully will allow the continuation of our society and our species, because I know we had a little chat about this in the car before the interview. I don't think we've got a long left.
No.
We talk about the climate emergency, but
I read an article by Chris Hedges, the great Chris Hedges, just a few months ago, and there was a line in it that honestly made the blood just drain from my body. He said, "There will be mass death." And when you hear a line like that in the middle of an article about climate change from, let's face it, one of the best reporters the world has right now, it really did shook me to my core, because it was all of a sudden it was the realization, oh shit, we really might not have much time left, and we've got to fight back against these lies and a narrative that is just not telling the truth, and which is why I think what you're doing is so important.
Well, I look back at our country, and I know we look at Julian Assange and the American government, but we look at the government that's been in charge in our country, and I look back at Edward Heath and obviously Margaret Thatcher and John Major and all of those different individuals who were in control of our country, and I feel very, very, very concerned that I just want that to end. I don't want those individuals. I just don't think they'll get away with what they do, because we now have an opportunity to all communicate with each other, but it's our responsibility to do so. But those people that I look back, and how we all watched, I watched Jimmy Savile every night, and I wrote to Jim will Fix It 4 times, and these people were our lives, they were our role models, and we put them up there on a pedestal, and we had all this faith and trust, and they led us, and I just hope we get brand new, completely different role models into politics, into the media, people who are really, really fresh and not scared of that kind of professional shame and reputation, that just literally driven by truth, and protecting the vulnerable and justice, and get all those. I always say it's all about dark and light. Let's just shine light on all the darkness, get rid of the darkness, and all of those stories that have hidden for so long, they will just go away, because there's a big light being shone on it all now. People can't hide and have these secrets anymore.
Anna, thanks so much for what you do. Please tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your courses, and your book as well. Plug your book.
Well, when's this going out?
This is going out probably tomorrow. It will probably go out tomorrow.
Well, I've got some courses coming up. For me, I am connected with so many people on social media, but I want to meet, as soon as I met you, it's a completely different relationship, and I hope we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely.
So it's the same thing with my actual workshops that I run. So if anyone's listening, I've got 3 workshops coming up. The February one looks like it's pretty much full, but I've got a 2-day workshop in March, a 2-day workshop in April. It's only £95 for 2 days, and that includes food, everything. And I'm going to show people how they can film and edit with a mobile phone to a professional standard, how they can get great organic and paid share and get their stories out there, so they could be, it really is open to anyone. And I just want to bring that kind of democracy to the media, where I'm creating more and more journalists. So if people could come on those workshops, the details are at breesmedia.co.uk/training. And it's BREES for sugar.co.uk/training. That's what I'd really like, is to meet people. I love meeting people, and I love sharing all my skills with them.
Well, it's been fantastic meeting you today. I'll leave all the links below in the description. Please go and check Anna out. Thanks for all you do, Anna.
And thanks for what you do. It's a pleasure to meet you, an honour.
Thank you.
Take care.